I have officially become a Swedish citizen. It still feels absolutely unreal to be able to say that. And this is something that I have been wanting and longing after for a very, very long time. From the very first moment I stepped in Sweden for the first time in 2017, I instantly felt this connection to this place. It always felt like a place where I really felt at home, and I really felt that I could relate really closely to the Swedish people, the Swedish culture, and now it's a country where I have all of my best friends, my job, my entire life, and Sweden has had a huge impact on me. Growing up in the US for the first 21 years of my life, except for 1 year, I lived in Berlin when I was a kid. My entire family did a exchange year in Berlin. Sometimes I wonder if that year in Europe as a child had a profound impact on my thoughts and views about the world, because as a 5-year-old, I was speaking fluent German, just like any other German 5-year-old. And I had a very big exposure to Europe from a very early age. And maybe that's one reason why coming back to Europe and coming to Sweden specifically, it just felt so comfortable for me from the very first time that I came. I feel like I've always been a blend of American and European cultures, with my dad being fully German and both of his parents being born in Germany, and my mom having Italian roots on her side. I always felt like that European kid in America in some ways, and now I feel like I'm this interesting mix of Swedish and American culture, because having been born and raised in the US, I am American. But then having spent the entirety of my adult life in Sweden, learning the Swedish language, making Swedish friends, I felt like I'm also deeply Swedish in my mindset, in my way that I view the world. And getting a Swedish passport is just confirmation of the person that I've become, the person that is always going to be both American and Swedish. And it's a really cool feeling to be a citizen now of both countries. The journey to becoming a Swedish citizen has been filled with ups and downs along the way. From the very first time that I came to Sweden, I had problems with my work permit. My first 4 months in Sweden, I was not able to get paid, and I eventually had to fly back to the US to get my first permit. And then there was even further complications with that employer, and I actually had to change jobs in order to get a new work permit. So there was always struggles from the very beginning with the immigration agency. And then upon moving to Stockholm, eventually becoming a freelancer for several months, and then getting a job at a startup company where I have been for over 4 years now, I was always having to get work permits and go back and forth and get approved by the migration agency in order to be allowed to stay here and live in the country. When I reached my 4th year of living in Sweden, a little over 2 years ago, I applied for permanent residence. And it took over a year and a half. They said that I could get a work permit extension, but not permanent residency. And this was a very weird decision. And I ended up talking to the case officer, and it was because I had worked as a freelancer when I came to Stockholm at first. I had not had a work permit for 4 years. So they gave me an extension for a few months only so that I could fulfill the 4-year requirement of having a work permit. The case officer was very nice. He says, if everything stays the same on your case when you apply again in a few months, we might be able to make a quick decision because we've already done all the necessary background and work on your case. So sure enough, a couple months later, I applied for permanent residence once again, sent an email to the case officer who was able to take over my case and get me a decision in about a week. That was a huge relief because I was used to having to wait a year and a half or 2 years to get decisions on my permits, and it felt so nice to finally be a permanent resident in Sweden. And the day that I got my permanent residence in Sweden, I applied for citizenship because that was the last thing that I needed. I had already been in Sweden for over 5 years at that point. According to the migration agency website, wait times for the citizenship applications are normally 2 or 3 years before people get decisions on becoming citizens. but I must have set a record or something, because 9 days after I applied for Swedish citizenship, I got an email from the immigration agencies saying that I had been granted Swedish citizenship. And it was a very, very emotional email for me. I actually got choked up. I think I shed a few tears. And my parents were still asleep because this was in the morning when I got this email. So I called my bosses at work. I called my best Swedish friends. Was just overjoyed. There's this unbelievable feeling that I never have to worry about waiting for permits, not being allowed to be here. All of those stresses just alleviated instantly. It was truly a life-changing moment for me. And for the rest of my life, I will now be both Swedish and American. Now here's a twist to the story that I also found very interesting. I had a Skatteverket ID card. This was my Swedish ID that I used in Sweden before becoming a citizen, and it had expired a few months earlier. To renew it, basically what I needed was to show my American passport and my Swedish residence permit. So when I got my Swedish permanent residency, I went to the immigration office to take my photos, and then they were gonna send me the card in the mail. But because my application for Swedish citizenship was so fast, I actually had already got the email and decision of becoming a Swedish citizen before I got my permanent residence card in the mail. So when I went to Skatteverket, or if I wanted to go to the police station to get my Swedish ID card or my passport, I had no valid ID. The only IDs that I had were my American passport, my expired Skatteverket ID card, which was no longer valid, and a Swedish residence permit, which a Swedish citizen does not need a residence permit, so that was no longer valid either. So I had all of these documents proving who I was, but nothing was valid in the eyes of Skatteverket or the police in order to prove that I was who I was saying who I was. So it was very interesting. The police station was like, "Do you have a sambo?" I said, "No, I don't have a sambo. I don't have a partner who's Swedish." "Do you have any Swedish family members?" "No, I'm no Swedish family members. I'm the first person in my family to be Swedish." They said, "Have you been working someplace for more than 6 months?" That I had. And so I actually had to bring in my boss to the police station with me in order to get my Swedish passport. And I had to fill out all these forms and say yes, that they know who I am and I'm Stefan, you know. And it's very, very funny that had I not been working in that place, I don't know how I would have been able to solve this. I probably would have had to bring like the certificate of citizenship in the mail, maybe from the immigration office or something. So luckily, my bosses really came through, helped me prove who I was. And a few days later, my Swedish passport was officially available for pickup. And I went and got it. And just an absolutely unreal feeling to have the Swedish passport officially in my hands. So guys, that was my journey to becoming a Swedish citizen. And I just want to leave you with this, that whenever moving across the world to a different country, there are always going to be ups and downs along the way. And I think that's what has made this YouTube channel so interesting for so many people, because there are so many differences and so many little struggles that you just don't face if you stay in your own country your whole life. But there's a great big world out there, and I always have felt this deep sense inside of me that I want to experience as much as possible and get the most out of life as possible. And that's what I love to share with all of you guys here on this channel. So becoming a Swedish citizen is really a huge moment in my development, in the person that I am. And I don't know exactly what my future holds at this very moment, but I feel so grateful, and I'm just living in the present, enjoying the moment, and it is a super great feeling.